Welcome to my studio and another floor talk from my virtual exhibition, A Walk with an Old Man's Mind. The painting I'm talking about, which will be the 8th in the series, is A History of the Australian Continent. When I've gone looking for an overview of the Australian history, Google, books, libraries, whatever, the references acknowledge the Indigenous First Nations people in maybe one paragraph. Whereas since 1788, there has been an incredible volume of works produced on the history of the Australian continent. And so this painting is aiming to address some of the disparities that exist here, because the Indigenous people have been on this land for a much longer period than the colonisers have been here. The painting itself illustrates this by the sheer volume of space given to the First Nations people and the small amount given to European occupation, which I've labelled foreign nations. But I'll talk more about this later. But first of all, I want to conduct an audio experience of this. I'm going to indicate a period of time of 1 second as the period of time that the colonisation of Australia has existed. And the second period of silence will be the period of time of Indigenous population, pre-1788. So here goes. The 1 second represents the period of time of 232 years. That's the time since 1788. Whereas the remaining time, the 26 second of silence, represents 6,000 years. But the archaeology and other ways of determining First Nations people have been here is now pushing out to be 60,000 years. And this would take 4 minutes of silence to the 1 second. So was there history before 1788? Of course, time existed, time passed. It was known, recorded, referenced by the First Nation people in a way which was not familiar to our culture and doesn't have records as the colonisers have recorded history. So discussing this painting, it's Circle of Names, and I've used the names that I could locate of all the nations that existed on this continent pre-1788, nearly 400 of them. And I've included one that's in black, foreign nations, which is the colonisers. They were foreign to this land. And I placed all these names in circles similar to the circles of a tree growth. These indicate the sheer age and the sheer volume of history which would have been accumulated by the First Nation peoples pre-1788. The space taken by the names of the First Nations and the colonisers also balance this into a very disproportionate quantity. The two hands of a clock that are sweeping over this speak of difference, a different way of recording history and time. I would love to know some of this history of the First Nations people, and I am finding some by listening, watching NITV, by reading books written by Indigenous people, from going on cultural tours and visiting cultural sites where there's placards and signage telling some of the stories, some of the histories that have taken place there. We need this history. It is a major part of the history of the Australian